of Global Christianity, written by Philip Jenkins, who is a distinguished professor of history and religious studies at Pennsylvania State University. And this is an award-winning book. It came out in 2002, and in 2003, it won several awards for Best Academic Book. And later on, an expanded revised edition came out in 2007. And this new edition came out in 2011. Now, if you look at, why can't I move now? Okay, if you look at the content of this book, this is actually a big book consisting of 346 pages, 10 chapters. In our previous webinars, we only look at one chapter. So it's really challenging for me to do a presentation here for this whole book. So there's no way, given the limitation of time, for me to really be able to cover everything. But what I will do is to just highlight some of the themes that I think are relevant to our discussion.
Teresa, can you just stop for a moment?
Yeah.
Abraham,
yes,
I think we are hearing your voice as well. So
sorry, I forgot to mute my another computer. 我顺便说一下吧，中文的听众们，请把你的右下角的翻译切换一下，切换到中文，我就在中文翻译了，这边就 mute 了，谢谢。Sorry,
Okay,
Theresa, please continue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I will just highlight some of the themes that I think are relevant to what we have been discussing here. And then I have 3 colleagues who will be joining the panel discussion later, and they will be able to provide more explanation and examples on some of these issues discussed by Philip Jenkins. So first, I'd like us to look at the reason why Philip wrote this book. He said, I wrote the book in response to what seemed to me a critically important historical development, namely that the worldwide geography of Christianity had shifted fundamentally, and that this change had enormous implications for politics and culture, no less than for religious life. And one important change in it is in terms of the center of Christianity. There is a shift in the center of Christianity. And first, I'd like us to remember that Christianity here refers to every group that claims to be Christian. So it includes Catholic, Protestants, Pentecostals, all sorts of independent Christian groups. So that's a broad definition of Christianity. So Jenkins predicts that in the year 2050, the world will see a form of global Christianity that will differ greatly from what the West understands Christianity to be. And he bases his projections on an analysis and synthesis of geographic and demographic data from a wide range of sources. In fact, the book has a lot of figures, a lot of statistics, data to support his predictions. But we will not be looking at all those data. Now, here is the shift in Christianity. Over the past century, the center of gravity in the Christian world has shifted southward to Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So Christianity has ceased to be a European American religion and is becoming thoroughly global. In 1900, 83% of the world Christians live in Europe and North America. But in 2050, according to Jenkins, 72% Asia and Latin America, and a sizable share of the remainder will have their roots in one or more of these continents. So if we imagine a typical Christian back in 1900s, we might think of a German or an American. But in 2050, we should rather turn to a Ugandan, a Brazilian, or a Filipino. Just an example of the statistics that Jenkins provides in his book, here it says that in 2050, Africa will be leading, followed by Latin America and Asia. So the global South will be the center of Christianity. Now, Jenkins make this strong emphasis on the fact that Christianity is not a Western religion. There was already a strong, vibrant expressions of the Christian faith in the Middle East and Asia before Christianity became associated with Europe and the United States. So as Christianity moves south and east, it's actually returning to its roots. And he quoted Kwame Bediako that what we are now witnessing is the renewal of a non-Western religion. Now let's look at the reasons for the growth of Christianity in the global South. First is because of the high population growth in the global South. Population in the southern nations are growing very rapidly, while the northern neighbors, the population are relatively static. And also, many of the fastest growing countries in the world are either predominantly Christian or else have very sizable Christian minorities. So, okay, sorry about that. So if you look at, for example, the list of the most populous nations in the world in 2025 and 2050, you see there, mostly these countries are from the global South, and about half are from Asia. Leading the list is India and China. So just the mere fact of the population growth in the global South, so the growth of Christianity will be tremendous. But Jenkins also was saying that it's not just because of the demographics, but because of the quality of Christianity in the global South, the commitment, the passion of Christianity in the global South that really makes the strength of Christianity in this new Christendom significant. So we can see the high rate of conversions. And looking at the high rate of conversions, Jenkins actually have a very thorough discussion of the growth of Christianity, the history of missions in different regions, but we don't have time to look at that. But he saw one important factor in the growth of Christianity, and that is the fact that it's a grassroots movement. It grew as a grassroots movement. What made Christianity succeed was the networking effect, as the word was passed from individual to individual, family to family, village to village. And these native converts were the indispensable pillars of the spreading network of missionary organizations. So, for example, as migrant workers, as laborers, traders, soldiers travel and they encounter the Christian faith, they go back to their village, passionately sharing the gospel to their own people. So it's a grassroots movement. Another is that the role of women is significant. According to Jenkins, women played a significant role. And usually these women missionaries, they combine their evangelizing message with a wide-ranging concern about the education, the health, the social role of the women converts, which transform the colonized societies. So a really holistic approach to mission, which impacted the communities. So according to Jenkins, global Christianity is inconceivable except in terms of the role played by women as spiritual leaders and prophets, as hymn writers, and key converts. Another factor is that, in the midst of persecution, we see the zealousness of these global Christians. Of the religious belief validated in the many stories of zeal in the face of persecution. There are a lot of examples provided by Jenkins in terms of the persecutions, the bloodiest part of the bloodiest one was actually Asia. century is one of the great ages of Christian martyrdom. So we know this to be true in China, the persecution, the church is growing. Okay, now let's look at the character of Christianity in the global south. According to Jenkins, the type of Christianity that have thrived most successfully in the global south have been very different from what many Europeans and North Americans consider to be mainstream. These models have been far more enthusiastic, much more centrally concerned with the immediate workings of the supernatural through prophecy, through visions, through ecstatic utterances and healing. So it's a very different form of Christianity that we see in the global south compared to to Western Christianity. And so in terms of theology, in terms of teachings and morality, the global south Christians are considered more conservative. And when he said that Christianity was more in terms of Pentecostal form or charismatic, he's not really referring to the denomination. These charismatic groups, Pentecostal groups, many of them are even independent. So it's not basically just the Pentecostal denomination. But so that's the character of Christianity in the global south. Conservative, charismatic, with this high emphasis on supernatural orientation. So the projection actually is that in 2050, the number of charismatic Pentecostal believers will reach 1 billion mark. In terms of the global religions, there will be by that time roughly as many charismatics Pentecostals as Hindus, and twice as many as there are Buddhists. Now, this different form of Christianity between the northern and southern churches will result into this clash of Christian civilizations, according to Jenkins. So he predicts that there will be much disagreement among Western Christians and non-Western Christians over the coming years regarding the right way to practice religion. So what people in the global south see as vital Christianity, people in the global north might see as superstition or even paganism. Two examples is we have healing and the idea of the unseen world or the spirit world. So healing, we know that in Western Christianity, healing stories in the Bible, they tend not to look at that literally. So it's actually medical doctors, not the church, that are the sources of healing. But if you look at, for example, in the context of Africa, when Africa suffered from this AIDS epidemic and there were no medicines available, the only way for people to be healed is through miraculous healing. And so healing became a really strong emphasis in many African churches and even in Asian churches. Pentecostal charismatic churches really emphasize this miraculous healing. And then the idea of the unseen world, or the area of good and evil, the spirit world. You know, when you talk about demons and exorcism and you know, witchcraft, these things are quite considered an embarrassment in the North. Whereas in the global South, these are ordinary part of our day-to-day life, and this is really part of our worldview, of our culture. And so in these two examples alone, we see this big divide between Northern Christianity and Southern Christianity. So demonology is credible for African and for European Christians or American Christians for a long time. Now, according to Andrew Walls, if you want to see the Christian church of the 2nd century in operation, well, you can basically do one of two things. You can either invent a time machine to go back to the time, or you can buy an air ticket to Africa, and the air ticket to Africa is less expensive. Now, let's look at an example, just one example. He provided a lot of example of theology and hymns in Africa and other parts of Asia. So here is one hymn that really emphasizes magic, overcoming magic, amulets, charms, possession, etc. So the culture of Africa really gives so much emphasis on these things. And so it is reflected even in their theology and hymns. Now, if you look at the divide between the Northern and Western Christianity, we see so many, well, especially liberal theologians, writers that are really saying that if Christianity will not change, if it will continue to focus on this outmoded supernatural doctrines and moral assumptions, then Christianity will die. One book is by an Episcopal bishop, Why Christianity Must Change or Die, or this Templeton Prize-winning scholar Arthur Peacock said that the church needs to abandon the incomprehensible and unbelievable teachings of supernaturalism and present the faith in a credible manner. So you see there the clash between these two Christian civilizations. And even in terms of contemporary issues like the matters of sex and gender, so Western media regularly proclaims that Christianity is collapsing and will continue to do so unless and until the religion came to terms with liberal orthodoxies. But the liberal issues that are dear to American or European Christians are irrelevant to the socially traditional societies of the South. Now, according to Jenkins, for the foreseeable future, still the dominant theological tone of emerging world Christianity will be traditionalist, orthodox, and supernatural. This would be an ironic reversal of most Western perceptions about the future of religion. So Jenkins was saying that not only will there be a shift in terms of demographic, in terms of the place or the center of Christianity, but the quality of the Christianity will be very different. The substance of the new will be very different. And so it's traditional, orthodox, and supernatural. So it will be a new era in world religion. And he looks at the lively scholarly activity and the flourishing spirituality in the different regions of the globe. And this period of mutual discovery, according to him, is inevitable. And this interaction will launch a revolutionary new era in world religion, especially with the growing sense of identity between the Southern world Christians. He said we would be speaking of a new Christendom based in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Not only that, he said that we see the churches in the global South, in all these three continents, they really share this passionate enthusiasm for mission and evangelism. And so this South-South evangelism that is now going on, he said it represents one of the most impressive phenomena in contemporary Christianity. So we see Brazil sending missionary to Africa, Africa sending missionary to India, or Korea sending missionaries to the Middle East. That's really something that is very impressive according to Jenkins. But also, we see these promising signs of growth as Southern Christians begin evangelizing the North, especially Europe. And in the process, they transform many familiar aspects of belief and practice. So there will be this new missionary century, but the missionaries will be traveling northward. And we see this already happening because of the diasporas. Many Filipinos going to Europe, or Indians. So because of this migration, because of diaspora, this is actually already happening. So that's an exciting thing because it will also transform Northern Christianity according to Jenkins. So if in fact the bulk of the Christian population is going to be living in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, then charismatic and conservative practices that now prevail in those areas will become even more common across the globe. So the global Christianity will basically be more charismatic and conservative. Now, one important discussion in this book is really in terms of Christianity and culture. First, we know that in the history of missions, in the history of Christianity, we see that Christian missionary work was actually often related to imperial colonial expansion. So Western countries didn't just take Christianity, but also took their governments, their customs, and laws with them. One famous quote from Kenyan Jomo Kenyatta, Samsi Tapi, said, "When the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible, we had the land. They said, 'Let us pray.' We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land." So it's no accident that in the minds of many, Christian missions equals colonialism. However, despite the imperialism, Jenkins said genuine Christianity gained a foothold in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So local movements rose up that were true expressions of the faith, not just imposed upon the people. But of course, the challenge of how do you express Christianity uniquely in a particular context? And here, Jenkins quoted Andrew Walls. The question is, do we have to reject our entire history and culture when we become Christians? So must the new faith utterly replace everything that made one Chinese or Indian or Japanese? And he quoted Vitalano Simalox, "To Christianize cannot be the same as to Westernize." So this whole issue of inculturation, this is a common theme in the history of mission, the adaptation of Christianity to local cultures and traditions. Adapting the gospel to local cultures was the path to growth, while trying to force Asians or Africans into a Western straitjacket invited disaster, especially, with the history of colonialism. So it's a very sensitive thing, so that when there is an imposition, there is that resistance because of the feeling of being, again, controlled by a foreign country. So in terms of the relation between Christianity and culture, Andrew Walls said that Christianity is something that is infinitely translatable. It's something that can be translated into any culture. And through the act of translation and the use of familiar local terms and concepts, the scriptures are forced to become relevant to its individual culture. So translation transforms Jesus and his followers into Africans for African hearers, makes them Chinese for a Chinese audience. So when Nestorian Christians proclaimed their faith in China, they did it in terms that made the church sound much like a philosophical sect, comprehensible to Confucians or Taoists. He provided many other examples, like in Japanese and India. And this is something that is very much the same with what happened in the early century of Christianity. So steep as they were in Jewish tradition, Jesus' first Palestinian followers portrayed him, for example, as the great high priest. So the modern Africans, in contrast, they find more power and relevance in the vision of Jesus as great ancestor. This idea is also something that resonates also in Asia. This Jesus exercises for all people the same care and love that the ancestor of a specific tribe would for his or her descendants. But of course, the debate over substance and accidents, it's really something that was very much dividing churches at the time, like, with all these white missionaries, white Christians. The question was, how far should strict ideals of orthodoxy be sacrificed in pursuit of a successful missionary strategy? So adaptation attracts little criticism so long as the fundamental truths of a faith are not compromised. The issue then becomes determining just what are the core beliefs of Christianity and what are cultural accidents. Now, at what point does enculturation end to be replaced by the submergence of Christianity into some other religion? Now, these Western observers and critics were saying that actually what is happening is not just assimilation, not just enculturation, but syncretism. So the core of the faith is now being replaced by pagan elements. That's what they were saying. But actually the question is actually how many of the church's accepted practices were in reality reflections of European custom and prejudice rather than essentials of the faith. So the question really was whether those things that these European or white Christians were considering as core elements of the faith, are they really core elements, or they are just really more of their European expressions of the faith? So in terms of the local converts, they actually saw a lot of parallels between their traditional culture and what the Bible is teaching. There are a lot of similarities in terms of beliefs and practices. And so they found support in the scriptures. The stories that they see, that they read about, animism or the spirit world and all these other practices that is considered paganism by the white Christians or missionaries. These things are found in the Bible, and so they found support. And since the older traditions already included many elements that fit well with the faith that the missionaries were preaching, it was so natural for the local converts to draw upon them. So the main problem that the missionaries faced in Africa and much of Asia was not that they were trying to explain an alien worldview, but actually their message almost rang too true with local cultures. Christian preachers did not have to convince global South audiences of the reality of the supernatural, of spirits and spiritual powers. In much of Africa or East Asia, older cultures had a powerful interest in spirits and the real effects that this could cause in the human realm. So two examples are the role of ancestors and witchcraft. According to Andrew Walls, and academic theologians in the West may not put witchcraft high on the agenda, but it's the issue that hits ordinary African Christians full in the face, and even in some parts of Asia. So what these white missionaries failed to realize was that they were in reality actually at war with the whole foundations of a society, the most basic means of understanding the world. This is actually at the core of the worldview of African, Asian Christians. And this example is, I find this very, very challenging because I'm in theological education. So this dilemma faced by the European churches is illustrated in this parable, African parable. So a brilliant African student going off to a European seminary, and he learned German, French, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, in addition to English, church history, systematics, homiletics, exegesis, and pastoralia. He reads all the great European Bible critics, such as Rodolph Bultmann. Now, returning home to his native village, the student is welcomed joyfully by his extended family, but suddenly, his sister falls dangerously ill. With his Western training, he knows that her illness requires scientific medicine. But everyone present knows with equal certainty that the girl is troubled by the spirit of her dead great aunt. So since this student so much theologically, the family knows that it is obviously up to him to cure her. The debate between the student and his family rages until the people shout, "Help your sister, she is possessed." He shouts back, "But Boltzmann has demythologized demon possession." The sad thing is, you know, theological education is more or less this kind of situation where people are studying things that are not relevant to their context. We were talking about this in our small group last 2 months, where in a tribe here in the Philippines, a conflict occurred among the leaders of the church because they were arguing, fighting which is right, Calvinism or Arminianism, something that is very irrelevant. So that's actually one of the challenges we face in Asia in terms of theological education, which is very much influenced by Western approach to theological education. So if you look at how global Christianity looks at the Bible, they actually have this high regard for the Word of God. In much of Africa and in much of Asia, the Bible has too much appeal because of its relevance. It seems to be describing the world. Many biblical teachings are already things that the people know all about. So a large part of the message has already been conveyed. And and when they look at the Bible and they see that it's describing their society, their reality, then it tends to give the scripture moral authority. So it is something that we find in our mission work, something that it's not hard because people already actually have high regard for the scripture. Another thing that we see in this new Christendom is that Christianity is in the context of the poor. As Christianity moves to the global south, Christianity is entering a very poor world. And it's really, according to Jenkins, like going back to early Christianity. And if you look at the growth, it's happening in urban centers with great poverty and large populations of migrants. These migrants who are in a new place, needing community, needing services that the government cannot provide for them, they find the Christian community to be a place where they can feel the comfort of being in their own home, especially in Pentecostal churches that are very much the same with their the traditions in their countries. And so they find that in this community, they have a support group. That's why as you look at the growth of Pentecostal Christianity, they say it's fastest among the poor. It's the poor who are in need of hope, in need of something to look forward to in terms of change in their life and to be able to overcome their struggles. And they find that the Pentecostal Christianity is really helping them cope with their suffering, with their feeling of being marginalized in a new place. And also, part of the challenge here, when Pentecostal Christianity is growing in the context of the poor, of course, we have what we call the prosperity gospel. And that's one thing that is really alarming in many places. But overall, we see that the poor people, when they look at the Bible and when they go to these churches, they really feel that they have hope. They encounter this life-transforming power of the gospel that changes also their lives and their families. And so another thing that Jenkins highlighted in terms of this new Christendom is really the emphasis in the radical message of the gospel. There is so much appeal in terms of the radical message. So imagine people in a society like India, reading about Jesus who eats with anyone, mixes with anyone, and destroys ideas of caste. So Global South Christianity has served to take people who were outside the traditional order, people who are marginalized, people who did not have the right to speak, and has given them, from this idea of sociologist David Martin, tongues of fire and the right to speak out. So in the context of the poor, especially of the marginalized, people who are considered nothing in society, they are so attracted to the radical message of Christianity, and they see how the love of Jesus has embraced even people who are outcast. Now, another thing that I'd like to highlight in this book is this idea of church and state, which is very relevant, especially now in countries like the Philippines. We see that in the Global South, according to Jenkins, not only is Christianity flourishing, but also distinctively Christian politics. And politics have been profoundly affected by religious allegiances and activism, as clergy have repeatedly occupied center stage in political life. So we see cardinals and bishops emerging as national moral leaders. In the Philippines, we have bishops as congressmen. In Africa, in Latin America, we see how Christian leaders are occupying center stage also in political life. Now, if in fact Christianity is going to be growing so sharply in numbers and cultural influence in coming decades, then we can reasonably ask whether the faith will also provide the guiding political ideology of much of the world. According to Jenkins, we might even imagine a new wave of Christian states in which political life is inextricably bound up with religious beliefs. If so, then the South will be dealing with issues of the proper relationship between church and state and between rival churches under the law, tolerance and diversity, the relationship between majority and minority communities, and the extent to which religious-inspired laws can or should regulate private morality and behavior. And even here in the Philippines, one congressman is proposing that the reading of the Bible should be made mandatory in all of the public schools. That's just one example of the possible scenario as we see this involvement of Christian leaders in politics. We also see this increasing activism. During the 20th century, majority world churches came to be identified with the cause of reform or revolution. In the Philippines, during the EDSA Power Revolution, we have the Cardinal Saint of the Catholic Church leading the people. So in the early 20th century, according to Jenkins, exponents of radical political Christianity were chiefly to be found on the fringes of the mission churches. And both Catholics and the mainstream Protestants shared similar ideas about the right and obligation to oppose oppressive regimes, to defend human rights, and to combat the racial and economic injustices found across the Global South. And they found rich precedents in Christian history, for example, looking at Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King, but also, of course, the Old Testament, the Exodus story of liberation from slavery, and the Old Testament prophets of justice, such as Amos. Now, this linkage between Christianity and nationalism was enhanced as church leaders became prominent in the struggle against oppressive regimes. Churches adopted the message of liberation theology and tried to present a prophetic witness against structural evils. And the emphasis is that the church's mission is actually to promote the kingdom of God. We know this is very strong in Latin America, but in Africa as well, and even in Asia, like in the Philippines, and he mentioned Korea as well. Now, I will end with this predictions of future conflicts. As Global South Christians continue to grow, and we see that in many of these churches, many of these countries actually are also very much involved in politics. Then according to Jenkins, we can really see that one challenge that will be very true in the future are conflicts in terms of Christians fighting against other Christian groups, religious rivalries. And if you look at this religious rivalry in the context, for example, of national or tribal frontiers, then you see that this will even be more challenging. Because many, for example, in Southern African independent churches, they're also closely linked to existing tribal leaderships, so that a religious challenge will automatically become a political threat, the forcible response. And we see this happening in other parts of Asia as well. So Jenkins makes a prediction that this younger Christendom has the potential to bring about global religious and political conflicts among Christians and between Christians and the other major religions. And looking at Asia, especially that we have the three biggest world religion, that is Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity. So this is really a big challenge for us here. And understanding these three major religions is crucial in the coming years. And he was saying, Jenkins was emphasizing that policymakers, especially in the US, he said that they really have to make sure that we pay attention to the relations between and among these faiths. The international politics of the coming decades are likely to revolve around interreligious conflict. Above all, the clash between Christianity and Islam, which are growing almost the same numbers, the biggest major religions will really have this clash. And we are already seeing that, but all the more in the future, according to Jenkins. And along with that is this growing persecution. We know that millions of Christians around the world live in constant danger of persecution, of forced conversion from either governments or local vigilantes. So many Christians suffer violence and persecutions, most especially in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, in Sudan, but also even in Asian countries like Indonesia. So in Asia, these religious divisions and persecutions threaten to initiate future struggles. But Jenkins said, many global South churches are at home with biblical notions of the supernatural, with ideas such as dreams and prophecy. Just as relevant in their eyes are that book's core social and political themes of martyrdom, oppression, and exile. In the present day, it may be that it is only in the newer churches that the Bible can be read with any authenticity and immediacy, and that the old Christendom should listen attentively to Southern voices. Now, there's so many things that I did not include, but for our reflection, it would be good for us to think in terms of these questions. So what aspects of Southern Christianity are most striking to us? And what does an emerging new Christendom mean for the church in Asia? And what are important issues to consider in rethinking church and mission, God's agenda for today? So we can discuss this in our breakout room later, but also our panelists will be sharing their reflections and also examples from their context. So I will turn over now to our three panelists. We have David Rowe, we have Ray Peng, and Paul Cornelius. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is David Rowe here. I'm going to first introduce our two panelists, three panelists, including myself. Paul Cornelius is going to be sharing from the Indian context. Ray Peng will be sharing from the Taiwan context. And I will be sharing some from my China experience as well as being here in East Asia. So first, let's turn over the time to Cornelius.
Hi, thank you, Theresa, for summarizing Philip Jenkins' book for us and also adding some of your own reflections. I'm going to start sharing my screen here, and I hope, yeah, is that, can you, are you able to see that?
Yes,
Hello?
brother. We are able to
Oh, okay, great. All right. So okay, thank you. Philip Jenkins' book is interesting, written in 2002, and then looking ahead, basing a lot of what he says on facts and figures from 2002. I think it's an excellent book. I remember reading it possibly in 2002 when it came, and then I had to refresh myself again with what he was talking about. But I have a couple of thoughts on the book itself, and possibly a bit of a gentle critique, if you wish, of the book. A couple of other things, but I just wanted to highlight two things as I reread the book. One is, in fact, the first bit, as much as I appreciate the tone, the tenor, and the trajectory of Philip Jenkins' book and where he's headed with his basic thesis, I still wonder at the detrimental nature of Christendom language and even talking about the next Christendom. And for me, that is worrisome if we continue to perpetuate Christendom language, especially in our context in Asia, in areas where there is so much religious conflict. And I'll come to that in the context of India in just a while. The second bit for me that was a bit of a lack was the Asia focus. Especially in relation to issue of local and contextual flavors. Because if you remember, and especially those from Taiwan and Southeast Asia, even as way back as 1968, 1970, we had people like Dr. Shoki Ko, who had already probably was one of the first among the first to talk about contextualization. And we'd already begun to read material that had come out from his pen. And then other parts of Asia had already begun to talk, to bring a local flavor to the presentation of the Christian faith. So to in India, and I can think of several people, Indian Christian theologians that we all looked at, even from the early 20th century, possibly even the late 19th century, and just the attempt to make the biblical faith relevant to our context. And I wonder if we might have missed a beat there with the lack of Asia. I understand possibly that there was a lot more familiarity with the African and the Latin American context, and possibly that is why the focus there. But these were just two of the things that that came to my mind, and it might it might give us some more fuel for discussion as we get into our groups. But just to quote, and I'm going to speak specifically, and Theresa asked me if I would do this, speak specifically to the issue of conflict in the Indian context. And Jenkins in his book, page 185, says, as populations grow in the regions of most intense religious conflict, issues of faith will increasingly shape secular politics, domestic and international. So the clash of civilizations, to borrow Samuel Huntington's title from his book, in India, as I've looked and considered where we are in India, conflict really is not seen as Christianity versus Islam, as in other parts of the world. And that is the general narrative, even currently. There's so much of conflict is viewed in terms of Christianity versus Islam, and in the largest Muslim community in the world, with about 250 million, possibly at the moment. And interestingly, conflict here is not between the Christian faith and the Islamic faith. It's actually viewed more in terms of conflict between cultures and civilizations. And so it is currently, it is the Hindu civilization, Indian civilization or culture versus Islamic or Christian civilizations. Even very recently, as recent as maybe 2 years ago, or I'm sorry, just 2 days ago, when I saw an article, and it was written by a non-Christian, and he talks about Christianity being a failed project in India, and the attempt of the West to civilize or bring a Western culture into India. And so you're really seeing a conflict framed in these terms. Especially as you think in terms of Hinduism and at least our modern day understanding of Hinduism. Hinduism itself is a very recent phrase that was coined by Indologists probably about 200 years ago. But Hinduism crystallized really in response to the Semitic and missionary religions, Christianity and Islam. Christianity obviously going way back to St. Thomas and the 1st century, and then Islam beginning with the 8th century onwards. And so you have this amorphous belief system in India, which then is faced with the Semitic missionary religions. And so in response to them, the Hindu faith is crystallized and sort of concretized into what it is today, drawing upon some religious texts and basing a whole system around those. And so in terms of culturalization, as opposed to what the West has brought in through Christianity and then also through Islam. And this is why, for me, the continued use of Christendom language is worrisome, because Christ is viewed as, Christendom. And then for us, I think the Asianness of Christ is so often overlooked. And you're probably struggling with those issues as well in your own contexts. Very quickly, I've just got about 5 to 7 minutes. So the current scenario and the church's response, and I'm just going to quickly finish with this slide. Currently, the slogan, and of course, this has also found political leverage today in our country. The slogan is Ram Rajya, or the rule of Ram. And as just a few weeks ago, we had the inauguration of the new temple building that is to come up in North India. And the slogan is, we want the rule of Ram. So it is majoritarian rule. The minorities and those of the minority Christian, the faiths in the country are viewed somewhat as second-class citizens. There's typically a tendency to become more of a police state. And we're seeing that happen now. All others, any who raise a voice of dissent, or you probably might have another faith allegiance, you could well be termed anti-national. And so the challenge then for the church is, what does it mean for us to be salt, light, and leaven in this context? What does it mean to have a prophetic voice speaking to the context today? And it's probably going to get even more difficult, especially if you think in terms of evangelism, and the last webinar we talked about evangelism. When you think in terms of evangelism, given this context, what does it really mean for us to be salt, light, and leaven? And then, of course, we have to continuously grapple with presenting Christ in Indian categories and thought forms. Just one quick example. Bishop Nehemiah Gore, years and years ago, as he came to faith from a Brahmin background, as he came to faith in Christ, as he about his experience of coming to faith in Christ, as he looks at Hinduism and the scriptures that he grew up with, and then as he looks at the biblical faith and biblical scriptures, he doesn't come to faith in the typical the 4 laws of evangelism terms, with due respect to all of that. But he doesn't come to faith in Christ with the language of sin and death and so on. But as he looks at the Hindu faith and as he looks at the biblical faith, he says, I've moved from ignorance, which is a very anyana, which is a very Indian category of understanding a person's state. I moved from ignorance to wisdom. And actually he relates, he links it to Christ as the wisdom or the jnana of God. And then he says, I moved from darkness to light. And these are all as biblical categories as they come. And so he approaches his own faith with these categories. And I wonder, for the church, given all that we're going through, as we seek to present Christ, as we seek to live out Christ in this new, for the lack of any other word, I'll use Jenkins, in this new Christendom, or in the new phase of Christianity, is how I would like to put it. I think these are some of the issues that we continue to grapple with. So even in the midst of a majoritarian rule, we continue to grapple with the issue of being salt, light, and leaven, and also presenting Christ with categories and tones that are familiar to the Indian populace. So I'm going to quickly stop there because I don't have much more time. But just some brief reflections based on Philip Jenkins' book there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Cornelius. Great India. Now we're going to turn over the time to Ray Peng. Ray Peng is in Taiwan. He is the chair of the COE Overseas Chinese Mission Evangelism Network, as well as has been involved with the United Mission of Taiwan in mobilizing churches in Taiwan for missions. Ray, go ahead and take the platform here.
Greetings, everyone. Yeah, let me just start with this photo. I'm not going to share that much from just the Taiwan context because for the last a number of years I've been traveling, just like many of you guys, in other contexts, but just because of coronavirus, and we are stuck here online and being with each other for the sake of this period of time. I think I just want to show my appreciation for Theresa being putting this together, because this is a very thick book with a lot of information, and it's not easy to digest, especially it's based on the trend and the development of the Christianity for the last, I would say, more than half a century. Just sharing some of my previous experience. And there's one time I used to be working with a World Vision in East Africa. So Ethiopia is one of my field, and I have to go there and explore a little bit and to monitor the process over there. So I was surprised to see this poster, this photo is almost like everywhere. And this is, apparently the Last Supper, but they're not eating any bread as I remember, how they should be. They're eating injera, which is, the Ethiopian food, a very famous cuisine from Ethiopia. And then they all look some degree of blackness or brownness. So I was surprised because from what I remember, it wasn't the case. However, that's the reality of Christianity today. You will challenge a lot of things, just like uh, in this book, The Next Christendom is talking about the majority world, the global south, you know, the face of Christianity, the face of Jesus, and the formality of church, and challenge almost like everything. In the past, I would say, if you look like, you know, if you look like, you know, on the third road, you know, you would say this is a Mongolian Buddhist, and probably you would say this person is a you know, ancestor worship, African tribal person, or you are just a non-believer because you just look like a European. But that shouldn't be the case, and isn't the case today. Just the reality that I just show you another picture. This was taken actually in the heart, at the heart of London City. I just got an opportunity to participate in a you know, a pastor ordination in a Chinese church, and actually this was taking place in an Anglican church, more than maybe 100, 200-year-old Anglican church, and I was surprised because there is no so-called British white person in the house, and it was full of Chinese, and I was sitting there in amaze of the reality of how does he come to this place. And that's just the reality today, and we're experiencing that. And this one was taken last year in Brazil, and we're hosting a global mobilization consultation. A number of you guys are also involved. It was taking place in São Paulo, and the majority of the people in the mission world, we just realize and we just recognize the reality of, you know, the majority world has a strong force in terms of prayers, in terms of going, in terms of resources, are also taking place in the world right now. And how are we going to deal with the context? How can we work with one another? How can we show mutual respect to one another? How can we work together? These are the challenges we're facing today. And the last but not the least, one of my favorite people in the world, and also the founder of Operation Mobilization, George Weber, lately, I think last year or the year before, he released a book. It's called Messiology. And you can say in the mystery, you know, on the front cover of the page, he says, in the mystery of how God works, even when it doesn't make sense to us. You know, from the book of The Next Christendom, we can see a lot of numbers and we can reflect on a lot of things. But however, by the end of the day, you have to say, you cannot predict how the Holy Spirit is going to work. You cannot predict. You know, it's really hard to even say how mission or global Christianity is going to be developed. Just even by the end of year, how it will all turn out. Because just remember, in the beginning of the year, none of us will be, you know, predicting or aware of this is taking places. And I just saw Dr. Todd Johnson is online right now, and I feel that I feel a bit sorry for him because he just released a latest book of his, you know, global Christianity and stuff. And the reality is, since the book is released, the world changed again, you know, like crazy. It's almost impossible to really grasp like what's happening now and how can we predict within the 10 years time and how they will look like. But I do believe and firmly believe Holy Spirit and God have His own plan, and we all have to just enjoy the ride. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Because of time, I'm going to shorten my presentation here just with one slide. Can you all, let me just share my slide here quickly with you. And oops. So here's just something that I just kind of summarized from what I wanted to do, a sort of a quick comparison and from the differences and similarities between China, and I would put East Asia as a broader context, and the global South, which Philip Jenkins primarily refers to. And the next Christendom, actually on page 4, Philip Jenkins writes, "There's a standard Christianity of the present age, a demonstration model of its character. Anyone who wishes to undertake serious study of Christianity these days needs to know something about Africa." And I think it's true that Philip Jenkins, I would even put Andrew Walls, as well as a lot of world Christianity scholars, have been observing the non-Western world primarily from the lenses of the global South, and primarily from Africa as the key region to compare with. Now, of course, Latin America and Asia are also bundled together with this, but it's primarily, I think, Africa in the context of what they have experienced as they see the biggest differences between the West and the global South. And so very interestingly, of course, Asia is within this East Asia, in some sense, Northeast Asia and China is part of not the Southern Hemisphere, but the global North, in the sense of the being north of the equator. And so there are some interesting things that there's similarities with the global South, as well as differences. And so, and I think you could say this from almost every country. I'm sure that you could say that with India as well, as you have shared. But here are some of the similarities and differences that I've just quickly will state. And due to time, I'm gonna go very quickly. Again, what I'm gonna share from my own China experience. I know we have a lot of China leaders on here, so let me just say this: I don't represent all of China. I'm just going with my own observation, comparing China with, when I say the global South, I primarily want to say more of the non-Western, you can say poor developing countries, third world countries that are rising to become developed. And China has been part of that process. And East Asia, of course, maybe has already gone through the developing stage to become more developed. But here are some of the similarities. No doubt, China, East Asia, were very conservative theologically, Bible-centric. In some sense, China, I think, is the last remaining, you can say, the most conservative of you can say the fundamentalist movement is still very alive in China. It may not even be alive very well outside of China anymore, primarily because of the political situation. But conservatively, probably the most conservative of all the regions. Like Africa, very conservative. In some sense, they would really be against gay marriage, and a lot of the newer ideas coming out of even the more open evangelicalism. Now, the second thing that is very similar, instead of using supernatural, I'm going to say there's a strong pietistic root that came from the missionaries. And of course, it is related to the supernatural as well. We see miracles taking place especially in the rural areas in China, even in Korea, as much as you can say it's urbanized, modernized, but a strong pietistic supernaturalism that whether you're in a Presbyterian church or not, it's very, very pietistic and so on. And I think that reflects some of the spirituality in East Asia, Hong Kong, a little more modernized in Japan, maybe less so than Korea and China, and so on. Persecution, of course, is similar, especially with China, not in the other Eastern Asia countries. And then formally, I would say China is going through a transition from a church that of the poor, for the poor, as a transitions into urbanization, the urban church now becoming more of a middle class, which I'm going to show the differences later. Maybe just slip over right there, you see middle class, crazy rich Asians. That's the major difference that I see from East Asia. I would say, you know, of course you have the more developed cities in Asia, you know, Seoul, even Tokyo, Hong Kong, Beijing and Shanghai would qualify more in this middle class kind of, and I'm not saying they're all rich, but they're definitely, it's not the same as the global South poor. Another similarity is that it is coming out of a post-colonial context. There was a time when there is still some anti-Western missionary kind of sentiment, anti-Western, especially of course in the Three South, but even in the house church, I get that at times. I'm often, I hear a phrase from some of the house church leaders. They tell me, just make sure that the West doesn't bully us, you know, or be a chief woman, you know. And so there's a little of that feeling of the West is still out there to kind of, but I would say the big difference between, at least for China and even for Korea, compared to the global South in their attitude toward the Western missionary movement is, my sense is, compared to Africa at least, and even Latin America, is because Africa and Latin America have come out of more of a colonial, more recent colonial heritage with missionaries from that era still there. There's still more of an anti-missionary presence, maybe anti-Western colonial feeling in the global South compared to China and Korea. Korea, I think, already being, you know, they're thinking we can, you know, we should help the West. They're not even thinking about the Westerners bullying them. They're thinking we can bully the Westerners. You know, they're more in that mindset. We're going to conquer the world kind of mindset. So but China being very appreciative of the missionaries. You know, they had a session where they remembered the missionary martyrs that came to China, and they even showed pictures of them with their children, and especially during the Boxer Rebellion. And they're very appreciative of the Western missionaries because they're getting ready to also be involved in missions. And then finally, a big similarity is, of course, indigenization, contextualization. You see sinicization in the Three South, but there's a self-theologizing of taking place in East Asia. You know, even with Korea, the Minju theology, China, you know, there's indigenous theology with the Back to Jerusalem, the theology of suffering. And then that's transitioning to a self-missionizing or self-missionization, where it's going to a context now where that China will then also take its own context and learn from it and then become involved in missions. Primarily, the major difference, though, is as you see, I talked about activism and human rights and injustices and liberation theology. Yes, we see the Korean church at some point in the earlier stages after World War II, you know, when they were under Japan, the Korean church coming out of that liberation. But I would say, though, China right now is not, they're more not focusing on the injustices or human rights right now, because for them, that's not their main priority. Although some of them are engaged in that, but primarily they're about expanding the church within their own culture, as well as expanding the church globally in a mission movement. And that now, of course, Hong Kong is going through its own issues, and I think we'll see that we'll have someone share about that later. Of course, church and state is a big difference, and with persecution being just a very big difference compared to some of the other areas of the world with a strong Chinese government, and the relationship church and state is actually probably the most sensitive one, so I won't even go into the details of it. But the last thing I do want to share is the difference that I see between China, at least, and the global South, is that there is a transition from indigenization to internationalization, meaning that for the sake of missions, the church is thinking of how can we be, in some sense, less indigenously Chinese so that we can prepare ourselves to become more globally aware to bring the gospel cross-culturally to others. And that's sort of it's from mission field to mission force transition that we see take place even in the global South, when you start to transition from reaching your own culture to reaching other cultures, there is taking a step back and doing some self-reflection and saying, what is truly the gospel? What do we need to become less Chinese in order to take the gospel to other areas of the world? I think it's just in the beginning stages, but just to say that would be some major things that I would see could be some major differences. Okay, I'll end it right there because of time. I now want to turn over the time now to dividing us into small groups as we are going to talk about, and first of all, maybe before we begin the small group time, here's a quick announcement. Can you go back to that announcement here? I did mention we will have a speaker in our next section, October 20th, on social movements, church and social movements, Martin Luther King, Billy Graham, and Hong Kong. It's a very interesting thing. Actually, this is sort of what I had mentioned, but the whole movement of what's taking place in Hong Kong is reflective in some sense of what took place with Martin Luther King and Billy Graham. But anyway, so that will be the next session on October 2020 with Dr. Lowe. Okay, so Abraham, can you now turn over the time now and divide us into small groups? But can we have the questions that we'll be talking about just quickly shown right here? What are the questions that we would like to have you talk about? I believe they were in Theresa's seminar. Okay, so these are the three questions.
Yes.
Yes, if you can quickly, for those, can you just take a quick picture of this slide on your iPhone right now? And when you're dividing into small groups, if you can make sure just, if possible, try to cover these three questions. Okay, go ahead.